Welcome to the Cold War series. This time we're going to talk about JFK. Note that this will be a very long video, I think, and I will still not be going too much in depth. Just basically so you know that JFK was the youngest man ever elected President of the United States. He was also the youngest ever to die in office. Okay? So, let's start right away. So in this video, I will only focus on the national scene and foreign affairs. All other aspects will not be covered. Okay. So let us resume. The national scene. Okay, so the New Frontier, the name Kennedy gave to his program, got off to a slow start, but the 87th Congress finally began passing measures sponsored by the administration. In April 1961, the legislators approved aid to economically depressed areas. In May, Congress approved an increase in minimum hourly wage from $1 to $1.25. In September 1962, Congress passed Kennedy's Trade Expansion Act. The act gave the president wide powers to cut tariffs so the United States could trade freely with the European Economic Community, which is now part of the European Union. One of the most successful of Kennedy's programs was the U.S. Peace Corps. It was launched by an executive order in March 1961 and was later authorized by Congress. The Corps sent thousands of Americans abroad to help people in developing nations raise their standards of living. The Peace Corps seemed to carry the enthusiasm of the president to the people of other countries, who often called it Kennedy's Corps. Kennedy also met major legislative defeats. Congress rejected a cabinet-level Department of Urban Affairs and Kennedy's plan for medical care for the aged. Both measures later passed during Johnson's presidency. Kennedy's farm program also suffered defeats. Kennedy's reorganized the nation's defense policies by increasing conventional weapons. He wanted to be prepared for non-nuclear wars and to make every effort to avoid using nuclear weapons. So, let's get started. We're going to start off with business and labor. In March 1962, the major steel producers signed a contract with steelworker union that increased workers' benefits, but not their wages. Kennedy praised the contract, which he said would help prevent inflation. On April 10th, the United States Steel Corporation led a move to raise steel prices $6 a ton. Kennedy angrily denounced the move as causing needless inflation, and the companies canceled it. In May, prices on the New York Stock Exchange made their sharpest drop since 1929. Many people blamed the Kennedy administration. They felt the president's action towards the steel companies reflected an anti-business attitude. The president tried to answer these charges in a speech. He said there are three great ideas or myths in our domestic affairs that may prevent effective action. 1. That the federal debt is too large. 2. That the federal government is too big. And 3. That businesses cannot place confidence in his administration. Kennedy aided business by increasing tax benefits for companies investing in new equipment. In 1963, he proposed a $10 billion tax cut, which included lowering corporate taxes. He thought that the public would be able to spend more if taxes were cut. The increased spending would generate new business, and the taxes received from an expanded economy would more than offset the revenue lost in tax cut. Next, we're going to talk about civil rights. So, The demands for equal rights, and you should note that the Soviet Union often criticized the Kennedy administration for these things. Demands for equal rights for African Americans became the major domestic issue during the Kennedy administration. In 1961, a group of nonviolent freedom riders made up of black and whites entered Montgomery, Alabama, by bus to test local segregation laws. Rioters attacked them, and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy sent U.S. Marshals to the city to help restore order. In 1962, James Meredith became the first black to enroll at the University of Mississippi. Despite much opposition, 2 people were killed in the rioting that followed on the university campus of Oxford. The president ordered 3,000 federal troops to the area to restore order. In 1963, demands for African Americans for equal civil and economic rights increased, and racial protests and demonstrations took place across the United States. In May 1963, rioting broke out in Birmingham, Alabama. In June, Kennedy federalized the Alabama National Guard to enforce the integration of the University of Alabama. Kennedy federalized the Guard again in September to ensure the integration of public schools in 3 Alabama cities. On August 28, 1963, about 250,000 persons staged a Freedom March in Washington, D.C. to demonstrate their demands for equal rights for blacks. To meet growing demands of African Americans, Kennedy asked Congress to pass legislation requiring hotels, motels, and restaurants to admit customers regardless of race. He also asked Congress to grant the Attorney General authority to begin court suits to desegregate schools on behalf of the private citizens unable to start legal actions themselves. In requesting the sweeping civil rights legislation, the president said, "The time has come for the Congress of the United States to join the executive and judicial branches in making it clear to all that race has no place in American life or law." Other developments were that Kennedy's Democratic Party gained 4 seats in the Senate and lost only 2 seats in House in the 1962 elections. This was only the 3rd time in 1900s that a party in power increased its representation in Congress in a midterm election. In his 2nd year in office, Kennedy appointed 2 justices of the Supreme Court. The first was Byron R. White, then Deputy Attorney General, and the second was Secretary of Labor, Arthur J. Goldberg. Alright, next part is foreign affairs. We're going to start off with Cuba. On April 17, 1961, the Cuban rebels invaded their homeland to overthrow Fidel Castro and the communist-supported dictator. They wanted to overthrow Fidel Castro, the communist-supported dictator. The assault ended in disaster. President Kennedy accepted blame for the ill-fated invasion, which had been planned by the United States. Another Cuban crisis erupted in October 1862, when the United States learned that the Soviet Union had installed missiles in Cuba capable of striking U.S. cities. Kennedy ordered the U.S. Navy to quarantine, that is, make a blockade against Cuba. So the word quarantine, what is meant is that they make a blockade on Cuba, which they can do because Cuba is so close to the United States. So the Navy ships were ordered to turn back ships, delivering Soviet missiles to Cuba. Kennedy also called about 14,000 Air Force reservists to active duty. For a week, war seemed likely. Then Soviet Premier Nikita S. Khrushchev, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, ordered all Soviet offensive missiles removed. Kennedy then lifted the quarantine. Moving on to Berlin. In 1961, the Soviet Union threatened to give Communist East Germany control over the West's air and land supply routes to Berlin. The threat was part of a Soviet effort to end the combined American, British, French, and Soviet control of Berlin, begun in 1945 when World War II ended. The Western nation opposed any threat to the freedom of West Berlin. In June 1961, Kennedy discussed Berlin with Khrushchev at a two-day meeting in Vienna, Austria. Nothing was settled, and the crisis deepened. Both countries increased their military strength. In August, the East Germans built a wall between East and West Berlin to prevent persons from fleeing to West. Kennedy called up about 145,000 members of the National Guard and reservists to strengthen U.S. military defense. They were released about 10 months later. Other developments were in 1961, the United States established the Alliance for Progress, a 10-year program of aid for Latin American countries that agreed to begin democratic reforms. Kennedy hoped this program would bring social and political reform as well as fight poverty. In 1961, Kennedy was interviewed by Khrushchev's son-in-law, then editor of Izvestia, the Soviet government newspaper. Izvestia printed the entire interview. In 1962, Congress approved a plan to purchase up to $100 million worth of bonds to help finance the UN. Also, the Western Alliance, so the Western Atlantic Alliance, remained strong, but Kennedy had trouble establishing a united NATO nuclear force. President Charles de Gaulle refused to commit France to NATO's nuclear force. He preferred an independent role for his country. Kennedy made a 10-day tour of Europe in the summer of 1963. He visited West Germany, Italy, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. Southeast Asia continued to be a trouble spot. Kennedy ordered U.S. military advisors to the area in 1961 and 1962, when the communists threatened South Vietnam and Thailand. Kennedy also sent advisors to Laos, in the summer and autumn of 1963. The United States severely criticized the South Vietnamese government headed by Ngo Dinh Diem for its repressive policies against the country's Buddhists. The country imprisoned many Buddhist leaders and students who were leading demonstrations against Diem government. Kennedy sent former Republican senator and vice presidential candidate Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. to South Vietnam as ambassador in 1963. Lastly, the arms control. In September 1961, the Soviets resumed testing atomic weapons. The tests broke an unofficial test ban that had lasted nearly 3 years. The United States began testing shortly after the Soviets resumed their tests, but the United States conducted its tests underground, which created no dangerous fallout. But in April 1962, the United States resumed testing in the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. Wow, sorry that was very long and there was many mistakes in my speech, but I hope you understood everything. Thank you.